Yay! I am so glad to be back here. My next guest happens to be a relationship coach who helps men in predicaments. So if you're married and your husband is a little bit lost, whether he's having an affair or he's trying to come home and he's just confused or struggling, this guy is the guy you need to talk to. His name is Jeffery Davis, and he's coming on right now. Give me a second. Let's go. So without further ado, let me bring on my dear friend and an amazing coach, Jeffery Davis. Hello, Jeffery. You want to introduce yourself?
How are you?
I'm
Yes,
amazing.
absolutely.
Thank you for
I
coming on here and for giving me the space to let people see who you are and all the great things that you do for others, because I think you're amazing. My favorite things about Jeffery are that he's very conscious, and he teaches how to be still and how to really get to know your own self and to walk in that space. And I've never seen him get mad, and I spend a lot of time with him when he could have gotten mad, and he's just a grounded ace. Would you agree with me, Jeffery?
yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day, like literally this morning, about the fact that I used to be very angry. And
Mm,
I don't really have and I was triggered all the time. I had no capability of really diving deep and expressing myself. And so, my coping mechanism was disappear for a while because I was just so angry and I didn't really know how to express it. And I was the guy that was, you cut me off and I was like, "Rah!" And now I'm just like, oh, okay, you must be in a rush, right? It just
what did you do? How did that change?
a lot of work, a lot of work, a lot of compassion, and for myself, and being able to offer that for other people, and knowing that whatever journey I'm on, somebody else is on a similar or different journey that I can't even see or I don't know, and uh, a a um, a reordering of my value set so that I I looked at what is the imprint I want to leave on the world and who am I, which is the most difficult question anybody can answer, right? Who am I? Most people are like, oh, I'm an accountant or I'm a, lawyer, which is not. That's an identity, but like who literally are you and what are you here to do? And so for me, I came up with I am love. I'm here to leave a legacy of love. And what does that look like? And how does that filter through in my behavior? And like it's a level of commitment to what I want to create in the world. And on some level, this is interesting too. On some level, by creating that, I actually enjoy that, right? So if I want a kinder world, then if I'm kinder to people, they're kinder to me. If I want more love in the world, then I put more love out and they're more loving to me,
That's
right?
right.
So I'm literally putting $1 in the bank and I'm getting two back.
That's right. So, okay,
Yeah.
so I know we don't need to go through your whole life, but talk to me about that time when you were angry. I think you had a lot of work. You were working in corporate America, and
I was.
how did you make that shift? What happened?
It was interesting. I was in corporate America and I was doing the thing that, you're told to do. And
Get a job.
so you get a job, make a bunch of money, work in corporate America, like follow the rules, da da da. Like I had a suit that I wore, it was a Hugo Boss suit, Armani tie, blah blah blah. Like I had the whole thing, right? And so I played the game, but it was a game, and I came to this realization that I was really bored, meaning unfulfilled, and I just couldn't imagine going down that road any further. That it wasn't going in the right direction. It wasn't going towards happiness, fulfillment, intimacy. And I didn't even know what intimacy was. I didn't know. I just knew that things weren't really like it wasn't a long-term game. I was just going to burn out and just fall apart.
So, how
And
did
and
you
I was
shift from that? Like that sounds like a great realization.
Yeah, so it was what I realized was I'm exceedingly clever. I mean, most of the people that I work with, they're super smart, right? They're accomplished, they're driven, I was all of that. But I was realizing that, I was living life in my head and it was a chess game that I was always 2 moves ahead. So on some level, it wasn't stimulating. It wasn't really present. And I was like, well, what's going on here? Like how is this not working for me? And I was like, I got it. I'm living life in my head, and I like maybe I include my heart. But what happens if this is my personal assistant and my heart is my CEO? Like what happens if I live
Ooh,
like that,
I like that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just taking corporate terminology and business terminology and applying it to my experience. So and what does that look like? Well, that looks like my heart says you need to go to Italy, and my personal assistant says, okay, what time should we go? Are we flying first class? And what days are we going to be there? And da da da. And so my personal assistant makes the plans, and my heart's like, make a left, make a right, and so I started tuning in to the directions of my heart and my higher self. That also took a lot of work to clear the space so that I wasn't driven by, triggers or judgments or perspective. I'm certainly not saying, I'm an angel, but, I'm human. Whereas before I wasn't fully embodied as a human, right? And I really became a student, and I've always been very curious about human behavior. I was in acting and and I'm coaching and working with people around their humanity and opening that up. And I worked in advertising around human behavior, although that was mostly about manipulation of human behavior and getting them to buy things that they didn't need so that, people could make much money. So it was really about like, how do I move those things out of the way through healing, through embodiment practices, through mindset shifts. And a lot of the things that I work with my coachees about, these are people that are really well accomplished in the world, and they've done a lot, but it's been driven by, like, go do this. Society says this is what success looks like, but it hasn't really truly been defined internally. Like, what does success look like for me? Who am I?
Right.
What's driving me?
Right.
And so then they, it's like that. I don't know if you remember the old Talking Heads house, is this my wonderful life? Is this my wonderful wife? It's like all of a sudden you end up in this spot.
Got that.
It's a good spot. It's a good spot to be in, right? Like, you're surrounded by blessings, but they don't really resonate because they're not coming from the place they should be coming from.
They don't come from the heart.
Right, they don't come from the heart.
I have a plaque. Let me go grab it. Hold on. It takes 2 seconds. I'm going to reach up. This is something that resonates with me. Hold on. See this?
Okay.
Hopefully you can read backwards, right?
Uh-huh.
What does that say? Can you read it real quick? Because I can't.
100 years from now, it will not matter what my bank account was or the house I lived in, the kind of car I drove, but the world be different because I was important in the life of a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you don't deal with children, but when you have a heart and it's living youthfully, you can be that way to yourself. So.
Well, you're right. So I don't deal necessarily directly with small children, but I'm dealing with the inner child that's not healed within us. And there's a reparenting that needs to happen because, truly you can push for a long time. But eventually you just run out of willpower, and all of the stuff you've been carrying and avoiding from childhood and things like that just starts to run over you. And people act out, they numb out with, sexual partners or addictions or work or whatever it happens to be. And so then, their life starts to fall apart when at one point it was amazing from the outside. And that's when divorce starts happening and, the old school midlife crisis or whatever that happens to be. But you can't avoid yourself for your entire life. There's a facing, you have to look at the man in the mirror, and most people don't really do that.
What do you think? What do you think? Sorry to interrupt. What do you think happens when someone is growing up and they have all that trauma? What happens to themselves that they push that in, that it comes up later? Like for parents right now, what could they be doing to their kids to make sure that this doesn't happen to them?
Sure. So what happens is people come up with coping mechanisms, right? So some of the coping mechanisms benefit them financially, benefit them business-wise, benefit them in particular ways, and some of them are very destructive. Ultimately, though, if you don't deal with what's inside, it does become destructive. It's called shadow work for a reason. It's stuff that is parts of you that are real and alive that you have not integrated and that you have not addressed. And in some ways, they represent a possible superpower for you. And so when you're a parent, I think, I'm not coaching parents, but one of the best things that you can do is to provide a safe space for the child to have their experience, right? And to tap into what that experience is, and to feel like there's a place where they can express that and to start to articulate that. Because that's interesting, when men are boys, they don't have, or nor do they develop, nor do they have a circle where that's accepted for them to develop the emotional vocabulary and the resulting emotional intelligence. So women, when they're children, they're always like, oh, did he ask you out? How do you feel about that? Oh, I'm sorry about that, right? There's a different level of communication. It's all about emotions and feelings. And men, and boys, it's like, oh, let's go play this, let's go do that, da da da, man up. Like, so there's an action, but there's not actually the access. And so that's super important for them to have a place where they can start to develop a relationship with themselves.
Yeah, that
And
doesn't
so
happen
parents can
sometimes.
provide a space for that.
Yeah, I like the safe space, because when a lot of parents are going through divorce and you got kids under the age of 18, and
Right.
instead of being, hey, let's go play ball, Jimmy, now what's going to happen? Will I have a home? Where will I be
Right.
sleeping tomorrow? And they start to worry about
Right.
that, instead of, what does Susie look like at class? Is she wearing a pink dress today or a blue dress? They start to
Well, they
focus.
also they also internalize the unhappiness, and internal, and there's a self blame that goes on. Like,
Tell
did
me
I
about that.
cause this? So,
Like, 'cause
so when kids are small and something, their world is small, and so they believe that in some way they could have done something better, or that somehow it's their fault, because they feel it so deeply, and they couldn't imagine that these two parents would be, not working together, or they haven't really individuated, so that they're not part of the group. And so when the group is falling apart, they feel that, and they feel that somehow they are tied to that or a cause of that, and they blame themselves. So part of the integration work is forgiveness, acceptance, of your shadows and of the things that happened to you in the past, and the people that have been had an impact on you in whatever difficult way. Letting them be free too. You don't have to go and say, hey, it's okay that you did this or you did this, but it's important to remove that energy, and to get that energy so it doesn't have a charge anymore, because that emotional charge means it's not resolved. And that's charge is what drives you. It creates triggers, it creates reactions, it creates things that you don't want to address in conversation, about your emotions, with relationships. And all of life is relationships, and all of business is personal,
could
right?
would you would you equate that shadow as something that might chase somebody who has unleft trauma issues? Or
Might
what?
chase them.
How would you describe that shadow?
Um, so, well, it would be parts of you that you don't accept. Essentially, it's
I'm
parts of
getting
you that you don't accept.
I'm
So, in
getting
other
a
words, you
vision.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah. So you might not accept that you're. So, for instance, with me, I had some shadow work around anger, and I didn't accept how I was treated, right? And so I didn't address it with love, so that it wasn't still active in my communication and in my reactions to other people that I was in relationship with.
Okay.
And so I didn't have a way of articulating that. I didn't have comfort. So if somebody said something that I felt like was touching on these sore points that I hadn't really integrated. Well, where now, if somebody were to say something, they'd be like, okay, that's interesting. That's, that's information.
Yeah. Right.
Whereas before, I took it as a judgment slash attack. And, I would dodge, blame,
Yeah.
complain, disappear.
That's really cool. So how do you make a shift from that? Meaning if someone gives you a piece of, like, hands you on a plate some negative comment about you, or it's not even negative, it's just a thing, and you take it as a negative,
Sure.
or as you said, ooh, that's just information. I just got a plate of information. I don't have to eat it. I can just look at it and digest it, or not digest it at all. Like, how do you decipher? How did you change from that? Like, how did you stop take it in? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a couple elements to it. One is it's about most of life is about values, right? So do you value being right above being in relationship? If you do, the relationship is dead. It will die a slow death or a fast death, but you can't value being right over being in the relationship with the person. So when you put the value of the relationship above, then you start to look at differences of opinion, information differently, right? It's like, oh, okay, so that's, I feel sad that, this is happening, or triggered or upset, or, I'm noticing I've got some anger coming up or things like that. But, I'm telling you versus attacking you, projecting it on you, because I value the impact that I have in this relationship, and I don't want to do things or say things that are actually going to damage it. I want to actually be in collaboration and communication. And so the way to bridge difficult conversations is through clarity, meaning, making sure you're grounded, making sure you're in a place where you can have the conversation. So that may take a day, that may take 5 minutes, that may be maybe just one breath. And then it's about compassion and about curiosity. Like, what is this person saying to me? Like, what do they mean when they're saying, why won't you shut the door? And you're like, okay, well, that's pretty intense, but I get it. You want me to shut the door? Okay, I could probably do that. Not a big deal, right? It's frustrating for you. Okay, I get that. Is there anything else? Right? So it's just being curious as opposed to being in reaction, and focusing on the relationship as opposed to being right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if you're in relationship, if that's being in the relationship and being committed for better or worse, because you're working with people who are married. So having that as a value and actually living that looks distinctly different than what 55, almost 60% of the people ultimately end up at,
Yeah.
which is, a split in the road.
So you were married, right?
So, yes.
And you were married. How old did you get married?
I was married for about a year and a half, and then we separated. And in California, it takes about half a year to complete the process.
So why? How old were you when you got married?
That was about 8 years ago,
Okay.
9 years ago, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you weren't too young.
yeah.
And so why did you get
No.
married, and why do you think you got divorced?
So, well, I mean, I got married for love. So, and I got divorced because we were just on distinctly different paths. It was like we just really, there was still a lot of love there. We're still in communication. It's not an acrimonious thing. We don't talk every day, but, either one of us could pick up the phone, we're still connected.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. So, and that's not, I've lived my life where any relationship of depth or, any kind of intimacy that I've had, like, I've walked away and there's still been the love there.
Great. Yeah.
Because I believe it's about love. It's not about a transaction. It's not about, oh, now we can never talk. It's like, yeah, we might not pick up the phone all the time, but, love is love,
Yeah.
right? So that's how I live and that's how I act.
And that's why
so
I
that
love you.
creates-
That's why you're so awesome.
Yeah, I love you too.
That's why you're a great guy. Because I can feel that
Yeah.
from you when I'm with you. And you don't just treat me that way. You treat everyone that way. And I think that's why
Right.
everybody likes you. You're just
Thank you.
solid. You it comes out of your pores. You ooze it.
Mm,
So
thank
I for
you.
one really
Yeah.
appreciate it. So you've
Oh,
shared with me that you have this coaching session that starts with a month of coaching, and then you bring them
mhm.
to your location in Mexico and do a 5 day
Yes.
intensive or a three.
Yeah, so essentially what I'm doing, like I said before, which is what I did, was moving people out of their head because they get in there so long that they get
Mm.
lost and they kind of lose the track back. It's the longest journey anybody ever makes from your head to your heart, but it's not very far, right? But the longer you stay in your head, the more that you lose the breadcrumb trail back to where you need to be. And so I'm currently living in San Miguel, which is called the heart of Mexico, built on rose quartz, which is a crystal that activates the heart.
Oh,
And I'm working with men, leading them from their head into their heart to change their life so that they live with passion, purpose, and they leave a legacy that they're aligned to.
I love that. I love that. So, in your experience, because I know you've been doing this a long time, can you give my listeners some insight into how men feel when they come to see you?
They're lacking passion, they're lacking purpose, and they don't know what kind of legacy that they want to leave in the world,
Do
right?
they even
So
know they
they're
want to
they
live a like some men haven't even thought about
well
that.
they don't. I mean, like I was saying, the most important question that most people never answer, but it's the most important question is who am I and what am I on this planet to do? And it's not buy bigger houses, it's not, drive a fancier car or, stuff like that. It's like what literally are you here to do when you leave? It's not that a building is named after you, but like what's the energy that you're here to do and where does that come from and who are you committed to being? And so they've lost that. They've run as far as they can run on the gas that they've used, which is external values versus internal values, where things just flow and they start to come to you, and it's a totally different way of living because you're now an embodied human versus a very smart human that's accomplished a lot. So I've worked with Olympic athletes, entrepreneurs, movie directors, people who have done a lot, but they've gotten to a spot where it's like it's no longer lighting them up, and they've lost it, and it usually comes down, what always comes down to, tapping back into their heart, tapping back into their purpose, tapping in back into the fire inside of them.
Do you think the fire ever goes out? How do they reignite it?
Well, I think there's only so much fuel that your will, like, so there's a propane tank that you get, and it's called willpower, and it's brains and smarts, and it gets you to a particular place. And even physiologically, over the course of a lifetime, what people will start to notice, and studies will show this, is as you get in your 20s and you start, you can do things easier, and it's all about do, and at a certain point it just physically becomes more difficult. The things that you could do in an hour are just taking longer and they're costing more for you. So people are working themselves into bad health, bad relationships, and a disconnection from what they're actually doing. And so we shift that from do into where do you take all of the information, all of the wisdom, and how do you translate that into who you are and then create like almost like your second act. Like how do you create what what you need to do and what you're on this planet to do, because we're not on a planet to watch football games and buy houses and stuff like
We
that.
aren't?
All fun
Sorry.
stuff.
Just kidding.
Yeah, all fun
Really?
stuff. But yeah, but all fun stuff. But really, it's about, like, I mean, we have a limited amount of time,
To-
and it's about people who really want to do something different, and either they've been trying to do that and they can't figure it out, or they've just burned out on the external values versus, where are my internal values, what are they? I mean, I went through an exercise where I was meditating and I looked at my values, and they kind of looked like Family Feud, right? Bing, number one, freedom. bing, and I went down and I was like, well, what happens if I move connection from number three to number one? First thing that happened was I felt a deep loneliness. I was like, that's interesting. I've never felt that before. And the reason I didn't feel that before, because that level of connection where it required me to have it as the number one value, that level was not any priority at that level. So
Mm.
I was feeling connection at, like a number three level, but at a number one level, there was a disconnect. And that's where these people start to feel stress, overwhelm, burnout, because there's a disconnect between what their values are and what they're actually creating. So I was able to move those values and feel the difference. And I was like, okay, so now if that's my value, how do I live from that? Because we have a lot of control in our lives, right? We think we don't, but we do. We can decide and control how we behave, how we experience life, what our beliefs are, what our attitudes are, what our values are, how we're going to interact with different people, what we're going to do with our body. We have a lot of choice,
Yes.
right? And but when we are feeling stressed and overwhelmed or burned out, which is another thing that people start to feel when they get to this particular spot, then we start to feel the disconnection, and we start to feel that because we're not feeling like we're empowered and we're not living in integrity,
Yeah.
right? The integrity, there is, all of us have some, if you want to say it's spiritual or whatever, but we all have some directive of who we are here to be.
Yeah.
And so we need to connect to that. And if we don't connect to that, then that's where the burnout comes from. That's where we start hitting the wall. We start stressing. We start, everything starts breaking down. And, our partners who we had this spark with at one point in time are like, who's this guy who's just showing up and doing his thing and then leaving? It's like, what, we had a thing and now it just feels like we're so far apart, because everything in his life is feeling so far apart. And she's just feeling that distance
And clawing and
of what's
grabbing and trying to
inside.
get it. So, what do you think? What advice
Right.
would you have for women who are married to the type of guy you coach? What would you suggest them? How do they act and behave with their husband from a man's point of view? What would they want?
Sure. Well, that's an interesting question, because I usually look at it from the other side,
I
right?
threw you one.
Um, yeah, you did, right? So I would say they should have their husband talk to me. And
But when they come home,
but I
how
mean,
can the wife support what you teach?
sure. Okay, so I'm working with somebody, and how can she support it? Um, well, what happens is when I work with people, their behavior changes, and the people around them, their interactions with them change, right? So that's what I discovered when I did my work, is all of a sudden the people that were in my life started to shift, and the experiences of anybody started to shift, and the reflections back of people of who I was being started to change dramatically. So, like, by virtue of the men changing, they will have an enormous impact within the relationship, because the women they're wanting intimacy, right? And to have their man show up at that level is like a gift. It's all I want, right? I mean, at the end of the day, everybody wants connection,
Absolutely.
right? This life is about love, and for some people, it's about running away from love. For some people, it's about trying to understand love. For some people, it's about being in love, right? But ultimately, I think everything leads back to love, and that's what we're here to figure out
Yeah.
as humanity and as individuals. And that love involves, some of it involves healing. It involves healing ourselves, and when we heal ourselves, then we start to heal the relationships around us. For instance, like, because of me healing myself and standing in love, you know, I got divorced, and we're still in contact, and there's still love there, right? Because that's a priority, and so I acted from love, and so the relationships, in whatever form they're in, still reflect that love intact. And when I shifted myself, my relationship with my mother changed. I had a mother wound. So that changed to such a point where my mother, at one point in conversation, said, "Hey, um, I'm sorry that I didn't know how to relate to you when you were a young man. And I know that that caused pain for you. And I'm sorry for all the pain that caused." And I was like,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
Like, when would that happen? I was just like, what just happened? And so, but I also was like, oh my God, the portal is open. So I'm right through. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. That means so much to me. And that's, that's really like a big thing to say. So I want to acknowledge you for that. And I also want to apologize for holding that against you for my entire life
Wow.
and every woman I've ever dated.
Do you why
Right. So it's
why is that so strong? What is it about your mother for men that, I mean, besides the fact that the wife is the biggest, closest relationship you'll have, but from your research and what you do, what do you think what is that connection? How come that pain carries right to the wife?
well, you know what it is? It's also, so it's on the flip side too, right? The model for the husband, for the young girl is dad. And the model for, the woman is mom, right? Is a female maternal energy or whatever pronoun, but it's basically that nurturing and that connection. And so if that connection is solid, but there's a lot of mother wounds that I encounter, and a lot of in men, and a lot of women have mother wounds too. And what's interesting is some of it is spiritual, some of it's emotional, some of it's psychological. And they've found, there's research that shows that trauma can get passed down 7 generations. So it just keeps getting passed
Yeah.
down until at some point you're like, it stops with me. I'm going to do the work, it stops with me. And then you heal. And just like I experienced with my mother without asking for that, she just randomly said that in a conversation after me doing a lot of work and shifting how I worked with her and how I talked to her. And so like it just ripples back. When she said, and we had several other conversations, but where she's talking to me and I could literally see her shoulders drop. I could see weight just fall off
Wow.
based on the conversation, right? So it literally goes up. But in our genes, we're carrying, this trauma all the way through until we heal ourselves, and then we start to literally rewrite our DNA and rewrite our possibilities because of that, and our capacity for being present in this life and what we want to create.
Wow, that's really cool. Okay, because we're running out of time. I wanted to ask you,
All right.
in your pocketbook, like, what do you think's happening with the men of this world? Like, for young girls who are not young girls, like 20s and 30s who might be listening to this, what do you notice about men these days? Like feeling that the women are becoming more powerful, not needing men as much, but yet wanting them, and yet they don't give them the space to be men, because the women are men and they're women and they can do everything. Like, have
Right.
you noticed?
Right.
And what do you think about that?
There's a loss of polarity, right? So there's a loss of polarity. There's a, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but there's an overlap, right? And just as you were saying, women are stepping into a role of being more self-sufficient. And I'm not saying that we need to move culturally to an old school model, but there's different energies, right? There's a masculine energy and a feminine energy, and they can be in different balance with different people. But if you have two people that have decided they're going to stand on the same piece of land, same piece of real estate in terms of how they're being in the relationship, then you don't have that polarity, and the sexual charge starts to disappear, the connection that causes creation and and basically chemistry, right? It's chemistry. When you add two things together, they create a synergy of something else, and that's chemistry. And when two people are together and there's polarity, there's chemistry, and when there's not, then it's kind of like, okay, well, they seem like a great person, but not really, I'm not feeling it.
Yeah, I see that with like
So,
gay couples. There's always a masculine and a feminine. They can't be two
right,
masculines. It just doesn't work.
right. And and it's just, it's about an energy. It's not about, their term masculine and feminine for anybody that's watching, but it's not really just in those two spots. Obviously, there's different blends of it. But the point is, there does need to be a polarity because when you're both in the same spot, you don't have the polarity that creates chemistry, that, creates attraction, that creates the spark of two pieces running together. And that spark, if you don't have a focus on personal development, you don't have tools to actually manage yourself and how you feel and the emotional intelligence to tap into how you feel, then that spark is where it turns into
Mm.
drama versus the spark that's like, because two people are always going to bump up against each other somehow. And so the that bump up against each other can be a spark that creates something else, another version, and another version, and another version, and you keep evolving the relationship. Or it can be a spark that burns down everything because it's about drama and people not actually having personal responsibility, integrity for who they are, and ability to navigate the things that come up in the relationship within themselves.
Do you think relationships could be something that becomes something that you work together to understand and discover since people are always changing? I've had wives say, "Oh, my husband was this guy when I married him, and then in his 30s he was this guy, and then at 60 he was this guy, and
Right,
when he hit 75, oh, he was like my sister. He was so loving and caring." It's like they become different
right.
people. And if marriage evolves,
Well,
you can ride that wave.
well, there's two things interesting about that. One is you should, as a human, be evolving, right? Or else you're devolving, right? So that's one thing. So the second thing that always is fascinating to me, where people are like, "Oh, so I'm going to be with the same person." Wow, that didn't sound fun after a while. But that's because you're not present to the fact that this person is literally moment by moment a different person, and that you've kind of given up on magnetizing and connecting with all the facets of them. And that can be illustrated by you have this relationship that you consider dull, and then maybe you go to a party and you're like, you were talking to that guy for 20 minutes. Like, what were you talking about? You were so animated and everything else. She's like, oh, well, he asked me about my art, and, we were talking about his art, and just like, because they're connecting with another part that exists all the time. So there's no way that if you're truly present and in the relationship, that you'll ever get bored and you'll ever be like, oh, I'm with the same person all the time, right? Because that person is fully available to you if you are curious and compassionate and clear, so that you're just like, okay, so who am I going to be? Like, what am I going to bring to the party today? I'm going to bring curiosity, or I'm going to bring playfulness, or I'm going to bring intimacy, or I'm going to bring gratitude. Like, each energy that you bring will connect in different ways. And I believe that our lives reflect the quality of our questions.
Yeah, tell
So
me
if
about that.
it's
That's
like, hey
interesting.
honey,
Go
how are
ahead.
you?
Sorry.
Yeah. So it's like, hey honey, how are you? Oh, I'm good. How was your day? Fine. And so you have the same conversation over and over instead of, hey honey, how was your day? Great. So what was the most fascinating thing about your day? So maybe you ask that. Or, hey honey, how are you? Good. So did you have any phone calls that made you smile? So, like, ask different questions and you'll get different answers, and you'll see different things, and you'll experience this person in a different way. Be curious and be creative. Like, you can ask somebody anything. Like, what is your heart heavy today? Is it light today?
Wow, that's a good one.
You
That's
know,
like for a woman, a
right?
man asking questions. Like we don't get questions like that. We like that.
Yeah.
Women do.
So, and one thing that also is great is before you go on a date night, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I found this really powerful. Is before you go on date night, you clear anything that's come up in the relationship. so that you are absolutely both connected on an intimate level and free from anything that's gone on during the week or during the day or whatever. So it's like, hey, tell me what's going on, so they can get rid of all of that and be fully present with you, and you're on a date,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So you're really excited and you're really present, which is what it's all about. You keep that spark alive,
Yeah, it's so funny how you can if you've got something on your mind that you're not talking about, it can
right?
easily trump any enjoyment that you're having or any.
Totally, right? And the date should be about connection. So what better way to connect and start the date by, finding out like what's on your plate? Like what would make what do we need to talk about for this to be alive for you tonight? For this to be interesting and exciting and playful and fun and intimate? Like what do we need to do? Like what's in your space that's
Yeah,
not?
isn't that funny? Because just right when you said that, it's like I can see someone who doesn't feel like they're in the relationship when they're really not into their own self, being like, I have to answer that. I have to come up with questions. Like it just seems so much work. But if, someone else came in from another part of town and asked something, they might perk up. And it's just
Right.
recognizing that that's where you are, that you have to might really, as you said, look at the person and
Show up.
show up and be grounded.
Just show up. Yeah, I mean, like it's a little bit of work to be present, but the rewards are
Yeah.
exponential, right? And the cost is exponential, right? So if you don't show up over time, it eats away and gives you less and less and less and less of an enlivened relationship, and more dullness is just packing it like, a box full of stuffing, and you're like, where's the actual order from Amazon? There's all stuff in here,
Yeah. It
right?
sounds horrific.
Instead of, you open the box and you're like, wow, this is
Yeah.
amazing.
When you go to a restaurant and you see an old couple over to the side and they're not talking to each other, they're dealing with the Amazon stuffing.
Right.
Just,
Yeah, yeah, right. They haven't unpacked it. They haven't unpacked their boxes
yeah.
and their garbage, right? And so it's literally just, you're gardening. You're gardening. Like, you want to harvest an amazing relationship. And what happens is people get into a place of compatibility and roommates and habits versus, habits are good, but, if they're good habits that enliven you. Like, if you have a habit, like a meeting for a couple, like once a week, where you sit down and you're like, hey, let's talk about what's good, what's not good, like what's working, what's not working, how is, not even just within the relationship, just in general, let's clear it out. And maybe once a quarter, then you sit down and like, where are we going? What are we trying to create? What's going to be powerful for us in the next quarter that we can do? Like, so, okay, we got this, we've got another vacation plan, but how can we make that one different than every other vacation?
Going to the cabin. I'm just kidding. Same thing. Going to the same
Right.
beach.
The cabin can be great.
Cabin can be
Yeah.
great, especially if it's free and they own it.
Yeah.
Okay, Jeffrey,
Right.
is there anything else you want to add that, and also, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So I'm on Facebook, and I've got a 5-day challenge free that's running on August 8th. And it's called Power, Passion, and
Excellent.
Legacy. So that's the Power, Passion, and Legacy 5-day
Okay.
challenge. So you can find me on Facebook at Jeffrey Dean, and I've got a click through where you can go and join the challenge, and you'll get useful information that will help you connect to your power, passion, and creating a legacy. And so I'll take you through some of that. You'll get some tools and techniques, and some really powerful stuff that I've
Okay.
used.
All right, so you just said your last name is Dean. I thought it was Davis.
So my middle name
Okay.
is Dean.
Me
So
and you
I
and
know
names,
it's
we're just
confusing. I should
terrible.
probably change
I keep calling Jeffrey the wrong
Yeah.
name. I call him Jeff, and I'm trying to be very respectful, and now I'm screwing up your last name. But I get it now.
That's okay.
But I like that. Jeffrey Dean sounds really
So-
cool. But
Yeah. So it's funny because I had this middle name, and I'm like, what am I going to do with it? So when I first joined Facebook, I'm like, I wonder if I should just let me see how that feels. Maybe I want to change my name, maybe not. And I just put it on there and I forgot about it. And then every once in a while, somebody's like, "Why are you Jeffrey Dean and not Jeff Davis?" I'm like, "Actually, I'm Jeffrey Dean Davis." So it's interesting. My father wasn't super creative, but certainly, but he surprised me with this one. So I have a brother, and my brother's name, his middle name is my father's first name. And then my initials are my father's initials. And I was like, wow, that's more creative than I've ever seen you be. And it's actually kind of cool.
You've got a great name. You sound like you should be famous. And you are. In my life, you are. So, all right. So any last notes that you want to share, last tidbits of advice for everybody?
What I would say is, if you're stressed out, you're overwhelmed, things are not working, and you're starting to burn out, just take a moment, take a breath, and come into your body, and then you'll start to slow things down. Because when we're stressed and overwhelmed, things feel like they're coming at us at this heavy, heavy, fast rate, and we can't get things done. And if we slow our body down to attune to the present moment, it's easier to get things done. It's easier to connect, and it's easier to listen. So it improves everything all around us. But we just go, 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 especially when we're in our head, and then we start shallow breathing, which creates more anxiety and body sensations that are not pleasant. So it's super important to be embodied, and the first place you start is with your breath, breathing into your belly, and just taking a moment, slowly exhaling, and then coming back.
I was just doing it now. I was like, your voice is very transient, like just very nice. I like that. Awesome. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you. I adore you, and I'm glad. Hopefully, my people will enjoy you as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and to everybody, and you're doing such great work, and everybody needs to work with you. You've got your own magic, and you're saving so much love in the world that people want, but they've just kind of lost the connection. And so I really respect what you're doing. I think it's important.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeffrey. Wow, I told you he was going to be awesome, didn't I? What a great guy. And the best part is, he helps men. He helps men become a better man. Men are having trouble these days. And Jeffrey is the guy who grounds them and teaches them how to love again, so they can go home and be the man, the leader, the husband, the dad. We need that. So thank you so much for listening today, you guys. If you can, please hit send, share. Please share this with anyone that might be needing to hear this interview today, because we got to get the word out. And I am so glad that you're even here and letting me talk to you. I appreciate it. If you have any sleep problems, there's a company called Somvi who sponsor me, and they have bedding, and they're amazing. They have these amazing pillows. I've got some videos below. Go ahead and click on them, follow them. They're amazing. Feel free to get stuff from them. That just helps me. And share this, and please come back. I love that you're here, and I love that you're letting me help you too.